Hey guys. So I went to a friend's house a few years ago who was planting seedlings in his backyard. He had a little greenhouse, and I never considered it before, but he had fans on the seedlings providing resistance so that they can grow stronger and be prepared for when they're planted in the ground outside and are facing the elements. And it blew my mind. And maybe that's a common thing for country folk, but not me. So really intrigued by that concept. And the thing I want to talk about tonight is the place where we're planted and the environments that are around us. I consider like the disciples, for example, and even Christ. When the disciples were called to go follow, they left all that they had previously been involved in. But they didn't leave the area where they were raised. They didn't leave their relatives necessarily. But of course they traveled with Jesus. And so their whole lives, they were probably subject to a lot of ridicule. Of course, especially as Jesus became more popular and or divisive. They experienced a lot of hardship. And of course, Jesus, when he was being raised, and even his parents, how strange would it be to have to be associated with Jesus, especially before he was glorified and before he kind of revealed himself to be the Messiah in this very straightforward way. We read of James, the brother of Jesus, that he didn't believe until after the resurrection. So he lived his whole life with Jesus, who was probably consistently being a weirdo and profound, and didn't get it, didn't know what was happening. And so one concept that is a foundation of my understanding of discipleship is that after the resurrection, Christ sent the disciples to Jerusalem, Samaria, and the outermost parts of the world, right? So he first sent them back home, like he filled them with the Holy Spirit and sent them back to the place where they were from. And I think there's an incredible lesson in that, about facing where we were raised, facing, the people that are around us. I think a lot of times we use religion to escape who we've been. We escape who has hurt us. We escape the people who've rejected us, or the people who might call us weird because we're now thinking differently and acting differently. So I want to pose a couple questions and really stir up some thoughts about what it means for us to kind of grow where we're planted and to acknowledge our experiences. So one of the first questions I have is, who from your upbringing maybe the one who's hurt you and the one who's wounded you? Who from your upbringing is guilty, and who could use a good proverbial bucket full of blessing? In spite of what they've done, are you still holding on to a grudge? Are you still holding on to resentment? Are you still keeping them from being in a place to receive grace from you and maybe even from God? And so maybe, in your mind's eye right now and in your heart, if you just take a moment and just bless them. Think about the situations that no one would want to relive, or the situation, or the way they treated you, the way they postured themselves towards you, that I don't believe God intended. Of course, God allowed it, But I believe that it's these type situations that can and will strengthen us, and strengthen us not only for our good, but strengthen us for the good of people around us. That there's certain circumstances that God puts us through that builds our testimony so that we can help someone else. So who is that person? Who is that? What's that situation that was hard that maybe at this point you haven't considered might be something that can strengthen you? But what grudges are you holding? What unforgiveness are you holding? Some people I have to forgive over and over again. It's not like a one-time thing. So who tonight do you need to forgive? Take a few moments and just consider who that is and why that is. So the other part of this conversation is, who have we ran away from? Who have we kind of not acknowledged? I remember in when I first got saved in my mid-20s, I remember watching a movie called A Guide to Recognizing Your Saints. And I don't necessarily recommend this movie, and that's the first time I thought about it since then. But God spoke to me so profoundly through this movie. It's such a weird, story of kids growing up and being rough and rugged and thuggish and all the things. But it's kind of the story of these kids whom realize in the aftermath of their childhood that some of the people who protected in the neighborhood, people who were rough and around the edges, and who ended up maybe in prison or something, they were the people who had protected them and who had kept them from harm. And I wonder, from our childhood and from our earlier years, if we can recognize who was it that stood up for you, who was it that gave you a chance, and who who you could think back on fondly and consider how helpful they were, and be honest about that. Because as we become more religious, I think sometimes we discredit people who may have not been religious at all, but who loved us and who cared for us and who God used to guide us and protect us. Because God doesn't exempt. God uses everybody, whether they like it or not. God has His hand and His purposes involved in everybody's life. We just choose to desire to do His will and live to do His will specifically, and we try to be led by Him in every step of the way. But He uses people by accident all the time. He uses me by accident more than He does on purpose. I'm fairly confident. So who are those people that we can look back on with fondness? If you want to write some of this stuff down, I guess that might be appropriate. So one of the things that is central to my understanding of church is that I used to drive across town, escape my reality, escape the people I was called to, and go and minister to people across town, which is a lot easier than minister to people that are in your own home and that are in your neighborhood, or that who your uncles and aunts and cousins and the people you work with and all that stuff. So, and ultimately what I did was kind of judged everybody else, and everybody else was kind of secondary to my church people. And I'm not necessarily saying that's incredibly negative, but it is a form of escapism. I think a lot of people want to be missionaries and want to go love on children across on the other side of the globe, but can't seem to have any compassion for the kids they see in the stores and and in their own neighborhoods. So and ultimately, and I think that's is a reason, is because it's so much harder. I mean, we have to face our own selves. I had to face my own self to love my mom and my dad, and to bless those people who've known me my whole life. I have to face all my sins. I have to face all the versions of myself that they've seen. And so, but in doing so, we grow so deeply. We have the opportunity to overcome those obstacles that were hindering us, and that will continue to hinder us unless we face them. So it's in those environments, and these environments, that we have to kind of own up to what's up. We have to forgive. We have to bless. We have to forgive 7 times 70. I feel like that's so applicable in this situation. We have to forgive 7 times 70. You're not, and I'm not able to keep a grudge against anybody. Christ has set me free from that. He died on the cross so that I would never have the ability and the positioning to hold unforgiveness towards anyone. So who is it in my life and in your life that you need to forgive today for the 70th time or 700th time, and to bless, like to be a vessel of blessing, of stupid blessing, of ridiculous blessing to the people in our lives? Like, that is the version, that's the person that's going to change the world. Running away from our hometowns, running away and going straight into the outermost parts of the earth was not going to save the world, especially as it replicated and the seed of the gospel spread through the world. We must face our own hometowns. We must face our own homes first. We must face our crappy situations. We must face the mirror first before we can go and run away and be some kind of freaking evangelist for God or whatever, like be some kind of saint. Like, we have to overcome what's happening, what's the wounds in our own hearts and lives. And thankfully, God has given us this, like, He's put fans in our proverbial greenhouses, and He's been blowing on us since the earliest years. Some of us more than others. Some of us have had the crappiest lives, and you're almost offended that I would even bring up this topic and make you want to face this junk. But it's true. God can use this stuff. I don't think God creates environments of pain and suffering, but I think He has the ability to utilize our suffering and utilize our pain to forge in us and to make us into very unique tools for His kingdom and tools for His glory. And so how can we together face our current realities? Like, what is it? What are we running from in our own hearts? What pains and sufferings are we causing ourselves by, like, not owning up to the environments where we're planted? And as we become prosperous in the place where we're planted, I mean, that's where we'll see the most profound miracles. That's where we'll see the most profound effect. So why don't we, I know it's really intense right now, and I apologize for kind of the absurdity of the video and how it plays out into our night. I know we're not normally this intense, but like, how does this speak to you, I guess? Because hopefully you've heard something different than what I've said, and that God is speaking to your heart about your situation. Like, what do you feel like God is saying to you tonight?